It was a weird year in Detroit. There was a lot that went right and a lot that went wrong in 2025. Today, we focus on what went right. All today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Wednesday, October 15th, 2025. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen. Every single day, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off of your first purchase. Welcome all, everybody. So today we are going to start part one of a 2-episode series. So I'm not even sure if that really counts as a series, but I do this at the end of every single year. We're going to talk about all of the big things that went right for the Detroit Tigers in 2025 in this episode. And then tomorrow we'll talk, unless there's like some big news that comes out tomorrow, at some point in the near future, we will then talk about what went wrong for the Detroit Tigers in 2025. And obviously this is the same format that I have for my game recaps and my day-to-day in season, kind of what the episodes look like. But I want to make sure that we really cover everything that went positive and negative for this team over the course of a calendar year, because some stuff feels like a lifetime ago, right? And it's important to really look at the entire thing start to finish and talk about what went right. And this isn't just like an excuse to talk about the first 100 games. Like, I understand that everybody is frustrated with how the season ended and the last 2 months of play there. I fully understand that. This is more talking about concepts, positional groups, or individual players that over the course of the season exceeded, maybe preseason expectations or did more, again, than we expected, etc. So first off, this will not be literally every single thing that, went the Tigers' way over the course of 162 games or over the full calendar year even. Like, that would obviously take hours and hours and hours, depending on how specific you want to get. And I also would say that there's a lot of nuance in the conversations with some of these guys, but we'll kind of talk about said nuance when we get to those players that maybe applies to. And then every single year, okay, literally every year, without fault. I think it's to the point now where people are doing it like as a joke, because every single year I have at least one person that comments on this episode and goes, or the what went wrong episode, and goes, wow, you're so positive, won't talk about the negatives, or, oh, you're such a negative Nancy. Like, why don't you talk about any of the things that went right? We're doing both. We do both literally every year. Okay. Just spare me for one off season. I want to start with some general, I don't know if concepts is the right word, but some broader things that I think went right on the offensive side of the ball and on the pitching side of the ball. So offensively, this team was very, very good at hitting line drives for a majority of the season. They had one of, if not the highest line drive rate in baseball for a large portion of 2025, and that is a positive. That obviously means good contact. You're not getting, everybody at the end of the season. The frustration was that everybody was trying to lift and pull the baseball to an obsessive amount and wasn't just going where the ball was thrown. The Tigers did hit, again, more line drives than almost anybody in all of baseball this year. So that is a positive. Now, the flip side of that coin with batted ball data is that does not take into consideration non-batted ball events. Okay. And so the Tigers did swing and miss a ton and did have a lot of whiffs and a lot of strikeouts. And we will obviously bring that up on tomorrow's show. But in general, when they were hitting the baseball, it was pretty solid contact, more than most other teams throughout the year, had a pretty solid barrel rate as well. So now, again, nuance, there's a tale of two seasons here that they played in the first 100 games, obviously looked a lot different than the last 60. I fully understand that. You fully understand that. We can have this conversation and point out that that's a good number regardless, or I guess considering that we both know that information. One of the big things on the pitching side of the ball that I was very pleased to see was that the Tigers pitching staff was tied for first in all of baseball in first pitch strike percentage. So just it is what it says it is. Okay, it is what it is. A pretty simple concept here. Just the percentage of at-bats that started with a first pitch strike from the Tigers pitching side of things. This is an instance where I want to make sure this is highlighted and celebrated because the team is accomplishing something that the organization is setting out to, I guess, highlight or be a strength of this team, right? This organization, this front office have so consistently, this organization has just continued to preach and preach and preach, dominating the strike zone on both sides of the ball. And they have been, in every single post-game, media availability and press conference, you hear about all the pitchers talking about their first pitch strikes. And AJ Hinch always brings up, the pitcher's first pitch strike percentage for that outing. Like, it's clearly something that they care a lot about. And so I think it's a big reason why the pitching staff was able to keep its head above water amidst all of the injuries and maybe underperformances that they had, especially in the bullpen side of things. They also took a step forward as a pitching staff in terms of just whiff rate. In 2024, a big frustration I had with this pitching staff was just an inability outside of Tarik Skubal and Jack Flaherty to have consistent swing and miss. Now, that is still kind of in play, right? Like, it still is mostly those two getting all the swings and misses. However, they took a step forward in that regard as a staff, and I want to make sure that's pointed out. Also, top 10 in ground ball rate. Again, on the flip side, also does not consider non-batted ball events, but that doesn't really matter on the pitching side of things now that I'm saying it out loud. But that is something that you want, right? You want either a swing and miss, or if you do give up contact, you want it to be on the ground as often as possible. And the Tigers were in the top 10 in that regard. The other thing is base running. And I know that some people maybe roll their eyes at that or are tired of hearing about the Tigers base running. I know the aggressiveness frustrated people at times, but frankly, it worked to a borderline extreme level. The Tigers had the most run value gained from taking an extra base in all of baseball, more than any other team in the sport. 29 other teams worse than them in just run value from taking the extra base. And they finished overall 7th most valuable base running team in Major League Baseball. And for a team that has little to no speed, this is something I want to talk about a lot in the offseason. This team has little to no speed and was the worst base stealing team in all of baseball. I would like to see that improved going into 2025. But again, we'll talk about that at a later date. I just, for what the hand that they were given, which is a slow, not very good, not very fast team, I should say, they ran the bases incredibly well despite that. And I think that they deserve credit for the mindset and mentality that they had in that regard. I want to give credit to the starting pitching. 7th as a starting pitching staff in WAR, F4. I use Fangraphs WAR for the most part. There's a couple of positions specifically I prefer R WAR, B WAR, whatever you want to call it. Baseball Reference WAR over. But for Fangraphs, or for starting pitching, I'm going to use Fangraphs WAR. 7th in baseball from just WAR accumulated from starting pitchers in 2025. They were 11th in ERA, so just outside of the top 10. They were 3rd in K per 9. Now, Skubal is doing a lot of the heavy lifting there, and that should be acknowledged. If you cut Skubal's WAR in half, then you're talking about like a middle of the pack staff. And if you have him just match the second highest F4 on the team, which is either Mize or Flaherty, depending on which website you use, then you're talking about like potentially a bottom 10 or 12 staff, starting rotation in baseball. The K rate, very similar, but Flaherty had good strikeout numbers for all of his struggles he had and whatnot, which is why you see that still at third highest in the league. But Casey Mize, really solid season, all things considered, obviously, was an all-star. We got to remember where he started and kind of where expectations were. I want to dive a little bit deeper now into some of the individuals on both sides of the ball that I think went right for the Tigers in 2025. We will do that right after this. First, though, got to talk to you all about our friends over at Game Time. There's nothing like catching a baseball game live. The energy, the crowd, the chance to see your team in person, but actually getting tickets, well, as we all know, that's the tough part. Queues, login screens, surprise fees. It takes all the fun out of it. And that's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. Game Time is fast, it's easy, and it's backed by the Game Time guarantees. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is actually the price you pay. Again, you know your total up front. There's no surprise fees at checkout. The price you see is what you are going to be charged, and that is awesome. It makes all of it super simple, and I can even see the view of my seat before I buy as well. So you take all the guessing out of this and just you know what you're getting through and through. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2, Locked On Tigers. I appreciate you all so much for tuning in. As always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day, and we will, of course, be back tomorrow, presumably talking about what went wrong for the Tigers in 2025. But again, if there's like any big news or notes, then we have a long off season. We'll get to it eventually. We'll prioritize whatever is, at the forefront of our minds here. So we're talking about the starting rotation, kind of the success, if you will, that it had. Again, it wasn't like some prolific, this wasn't the 95 Braves, okay? And obviously Skubal, again, does a lot of the heavy lifting there. However, this was a rotation that, even despite getting a bit by the injury bug quite frequently throughout this year, was able to hold itself together and was able to provide some valuable starts for the Tigers. Already mentioned Skubal. Don't have too much else to say on him. Casey Mize, I want to dive a little bit further into. Immediately after the break, he struggled a little bit, but then down the stretch, when the team honestly needed him most, he kind of came back and looked a lot more. I would debate that some of the best that Casey Mize has honestly ever looked was those last few starts in September. But that's really, even if you disagree with that, like he did bounce back to form a little bit down the stretch there, which was very important, but had a fantastic first half. And the biggest thing with Mize is going to continue to be, can he consistently get swings and misses, and can he consistently find the splitter throughout the course of 162 or 30, however many starts he has in a year, obviously. So that will continue to be a talking point with him throughout the winter. I will talk about that again when we do Casey Mize's player review here in the coming weeks. But all things considered, when we take into account preseason expectations for a guy like Mize, I think he certainly exceeded those and was certainly someone that we got more out of. At least I can speak for myself in that regard than maybe I expected going into the year. So tip of the cap to Casey Mize. Reese Olson was also fantastic. Obviously another injury. He's just been injured literally every season of his career at some point, which is super disappointing and frustrating, and honestly, needs to change. That will prevent you from being a starter long-term if your body can't hold up for, 150 plus innings. But I'd take 120 innings on a consistent basis from him at this point. But a 3.15 ERA before the injury is really, really impressive. Cater Montero as a starter. As a reliever, his ERA was over 5, but as a starter, Cater Montero's ERA was 3.72. want you to really let that sink in. Like that's phenomenal. A sub 3.75 ERA for this guy. Now, obviously, again, not a huge sample size, and the relief outings did happen. But I think, again, for a rotation, like you have Job go down, you have Mize get hurt earlier in the year, you have Reese Olson go down, you're trading for, Paddock and Morton, who are essentially nothing additions. Like they really needed some starts, and they got a handful of really solid outings as a starting pitcher from Cater Montero, even if these are only, 4 or 5 innings a pop. Those are needed. Troy Melton, very similar conversation. Not very deep into games. They wanted to preserve his arm. Eventually, he was moved to the bullpen, but the starts that he did provide were very valuable, and one of those was even in the postseason and did really well against Seattle. So that's kind of the positive light of the rotation. Obviously, there are some people that are going to find themselves on the side of things that went wrong for the starting rotation, and we'll talk about those when we do that episode. The bullpen, I'm going to be honest with you, is largely bad. The bullpen, I was beyond frustrated with this year. It's one of my biggest talking points for the offseason. Is I really think this bullpen was to be honest, kind of a catastrophic. I don't want to say failure. That seems too dramatic, but it was a catastrophe. I really do. The few bright spots that we had in the pen were Will Vest with about a 3 ERA and a K rate that was well above league average, got some solid swing and miss. He also was used a ton, and that's not for nothing, right? Like usage matters, innings matter. And you almost got 2 WAR out of him as a pure 1 or 2 inning reliever. That's incredibly impressive. So tip of the cap to Will Vest. Kyle Finnegan, for as much as I complain and whine about the deadline, and you're tired of hearing me say it, Kyle Finnegan is clearly the exception to that. Was a fantastic addition, was honestly one of the best deadline ads in terms of reliever deadline ads in the entire American League. I mean, maybe even in all of baseball. He didn't give up a run for the first month that he was a Detroit Tiger, then got hurt, obviously gave up a couple cents, then wasn't super sharp in the postseason, just eye test more so. But regardless, no matter how you slice it, a 1.5 ERA as a member of the Detroit Tigers bullpen is just so fantastic. And so that, for not a super high asking price, is a massive win for this front office in terms of trade deadline additions. One of the most underrated players on this team this year is Brant Herter. Brant Herter out of the Detroit Tigers bullpen had a 2.57 ERA as a relief pitcher. Okay. He had about 7 or 9 innings as a starter as well. That didn't go as well. But as a reliever, 56 innings of 2.57 ERA baseball. Are we comprehending how nuts that is? That's a large sample size. And that's even with an injury and a demotion at one point this year. 2.57. Now, there's a lot of projective stats that would insinuate that, if he was to play those 56 innings again, he probably wouldn't be as, I don't like using the term lucky, but the batted ball data, right, might not have gone, the batted ball, either I am about to say luck again, might not have fallen his way, and his ERA might have been a little bit higher, but I don't care how you slice it, man. That's over 50 innings of about 2.5 ERA ball as a lefty. And I think the biggest thing for that is, even if he's never very effective against righties, which I don't think there's a high chance of that, but I think that's somewhat on the table. He struggled with righties a little bit down the stretch. He is so good and proved to be, especially down the stretch, so good against lefties. I trusted him more than Holton against left-handed hitters in the last month or so of the season, and certainly in the postseason. So Brant Herter, one of the unsung heroes of this bullpen, and honestly is one of the reasons that, the poor numbers that this bullpen did have, bottom 5 in baseball and bullpen WAR, whatever you want to say. Again, we'll talk about that more tomorrow. One of the only, silver linings, honestly, was the innings that Brant Herter provided. And then, Rafael Montero was fine. He was a net neutral guy, didn't really get into high leverage scenarios, but also, wasn't actively losing the team games. Bailey Horn, similar thing, was fine in the limited innings and the sheltered deployment, to use a hockey term, that he had. So there's a couple of other guys that had, okay, fine years, but those are kind of the big, heading into the offseason, the guys that I'm looking at going, wow, like these were really solid season, and I'm hoping that they are significant pieces of the 2026 bullpen as well. Okay, let's talk about position players, shall we? We'll do that right after this. First, though, going to talk to you all about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. You pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. There's so many ways to bet on FanDuel, which is what makes it so great. You can build parlays, you can try player props, and even follow live games while they're happening and follow the lines and see them move real time. It makes watching football and really any sport even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in as always, making us your first listen every day. Talking about what went right for the Tigers in 2025, we move on to the position players. This conversation, I genuinely think, starts and ends with Dillon Dingler. There is probably no one on the position player list, certainly, maybe even this whole episode, that more personifies what went right than Dillon Dingler. He led this team in F4 by a lot. Okay, it wasn't even close. And he plays 40 or 50 less games than everybody else because he's a catcher. He is fantastic. Like literally, I mean, played 120, 125 games and still was over one win better than the next closest person behind him. He was fantastic behind the plate. He was an above league average hitter over the course of 162. There's some stuff that I will point out in Dingler's game that I would like to see improved. There was some play calling stuff that's not going to be, there's no number to quantify that we'll talk about when we do his play review as well. But he absolutely rocks and was maybe this team's most valuable player this year. Like legitimately, obviously on the position player side of things, Tarik Skubal is bar none, the most valuable player on the roster. But Dillon Dingler is Dillon Dingler had the second most WAR on this entire roster, only behind Tarik Skubal. And I think that's remarkable. So we got one. We got one. Okay. This again, if there's anything in this episode to hang your hat on and to be like, wow, like, going into 2026, they have a guy that could legitimately be an all-star caliber catcher behind the dish going forward. And he's young, he's controllable, and that's a reason to be excited. Okay, moving on from my love for Dillon Dingler, Zach McKinstry. And I know some people roll their eyes. I get it, okay? I know he was awful in the second half, but I said this in July during the All-Star break, and I'll say it again now. Based on preseason expectations, how can he not be what went right this year, even with a collapse in the second half? We were talking about DFAing this guy a year ago, right? And all offseason. And in spring training, probably a little bit. And he was an all-star. Also, for those keeping track at home, Dillon Dingler led position players in F4 for the Detroit Tigers. Would you like to know who was second? It's not Riley Green. It's Zach McKinstry. Over a 3.2, I think it was, win season for ZMAC in 2025. I still maintain that he is most valuable as a super utility and should not be a fixture in your lineup every day. I certainly don't think he should be in the middle of the lineup like he was at times in June and July, but he is clearly proved to be a valuable asset. And he's not going to have, like an 890 OPS or whatever he had, in the end of May and in the month of June. But if he can even hit like he did in the second half, 680 to 700 OPS ball, below average hitter, you stick him at the bottom of the lineup and he can play any position for who needs a night off. And as a lefty, that's a valuable asset to have. Gleyber Torres. As far as one-year deals go, it's hard to get, I think, too much better than what they got out of Gleyber. He walked a ton. He did not strike out very much. Was amazing in the first half. Obviously, the hernia may have affected him in the second half. He's not a good defender, never will be, but was a valuable asset for this team. And even if I don't think he's going to be back next year, you can still count this as a win for this front office and a win as far as, 1-year deal and what you're hoping to get out of 1-year deals go. He was one of the more valuable position players on the entire team. And it was just a 1-year deal late in the offseason. Jahmai Jones obviously finds himself here, was one of the best hitters on this team down the stretch. He walked a ton. He crushed lefties, an extremely valuable asset. And I think AJ Hinch loves Jahmai Jones. I think, I don't really want to see him in the outfield ever again, to be honest. Kind of a pure platoon DH, which is a niche, role to fill, but it's one that AJ Hinch will maximize and get the most out of if the opportunity is presented. And I think that's what we saw from Jahmai Jones, especially in the second half of this year. Now, you're going to have to walk with me a little bit on this one. I'm going to go with Spencer Torkelson at just his season, really. I know there's probably some people that will push back here, and that's fine. My reasoning, again, for this one is pretty much strictly based on preseason expectations, man. We have to remember that the thoughts surrounding Torkelson in February and March, when spring training and like when camp was going on, like there were people that were projecting him to miss the roster, like not make the opening day roster because he was terrible in 2024. They taught Colt Keith how to play first base last offseason with the intention. That was the expectation. Like we have to remember that. The expectation was they signed Gleyber so that Colt Keith can play first, and Torkelson does not make the team. He not only made the opening day roster, and Colt Keith had to move around the diamond, but he had a 30 home run season and an OPS in the 900s. And this is not I'm not saying that this is like an amazing, like OMG, he's a 1-1 franchise player. Like he was the 1-1 pick and we saw it. Like, no, okay, not even close to that. There are a lot of better first basemen out there, and there are certainly a lot of more valuable players out there. But a 30 home run season, an OPS around 790 is certainly far more than I expected from him going into the year. Now, if this is his peak, if this is as good as Torkelson is going to be in a major league uniform, and we can debate that later in the winter, whether you think that is or isn't. If this is as good as he will get, then like I don't want him batting 4th or 5th, even really like in my lineup. He'd be a fantastic 6 or 7 guy that can provide some pop in the bottom of a lineup. But I think he's at least earned the opportunity to prove if there's more to grow. And there's not an immediate backup like contingency plan really at first base anyway. So again, this is a win of a season, again, just based on preseason expectations for Torkelson. There's a lot of other guys that like gave us plenty of good and plenty of bad. Colt Keith, Kerry Carpenter, Riley Green, Javi. Like those are all guys that kind of had up and down years with a handful of good and also a handful of not so good that you can probably pick from. So I'm not sure, like you can almost split them in half, like Riley Green's home run and RBIs, good. Like Riley Green's strikeouts, not good. You know what I mean? Colt Keith, it's kind of like a month-to-month game with him. Kerry Carpenter has a sub 300 on base percentage and walks like the same amount that Javi does. Javi's Javi. And then, like, obviously you have the first 100 games. Like, it was a fun run. They probably overplayed their expectations. But looking at these guys' numbers from month to month, as a team, I still really think there should be optimism surrounding this team, not pessimism, just focusing on the collapse, heading into 2026. It's a young group. It's a very young group. And they now have 2 years of playoff experience. They have won a lot. They've also lost a lot. They've also have had periods of time where, there's been really, really good play and production and really, really not so good play and production from almost all of these guys are just kind of riding the roller coaster that young players really consistently do. They're consistently inconsistent. They're hard to project for a reason. We have a lot of years of data to back that up. So if we can iron out the inconsistencies, and with age maybe comes a little bit more of a flat line as opposed to a peak and valley, very curvy line of production, then I think the foundation of this team still could be solid. And really, all things considered, again, I know how the season ended. I will complain about that in 24 hours when we talk about what went wrong this year. But if we're just looking at this in a glass half full mindset, I think that there's still plenty to take away. And there's some people that are like, oh, we collapse, sell everything and just go into a full rebuild. That's obviously not happening, man. They've been a playoff team 2 years in a row. That's not going to happen. And I think that there is still, as showcased by the last 30 minutes, still plenty of things that we can, be optimistic about going forward. Now, there's still plenty that terrify me and that I'm pessimistic about going forward and that I want to see addressed, or else I'm going to, have a lot of concerns, and we'll talk about those tomorrow. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day, and we will, of course, be back tomorrow. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope, and I'll catch y'all then, baby. Go Tigers.